Welcome to Concepts in Chemistry. In this talk, we will discuss how to determine the density of a substance. To determine the density of a substance, you need to know at least two things. One is the mass of the substance, and two is the volume of the substance. To find the mass of the substance, you just have to find a scale and then put your object or substance on the scale, and the scale will spit out a number for you. Now, if you want to determine the volume of a substance, if your substance is a liquid, you can find a graduated cylinder, measure the amount of liquid you want to use to determine the density of your substance. If your substance is a solid object, then you have two ways in which you can use to determine the volume of your substance. You can use a mathematical formula, or you can use water displacement. Now, if your object is a regular object, you can use a mathematical formula if you know the formula. So what do I mean by a regular object? A regular object is an object with well-defined size. So it has a width, you can measure, height, you can measure, and then length, you can measure. So in this case, this is a solid rectangular block. So I can measure its size because the size are well-defined. And I also know the formula used to find the volume of a rectangular block, which is length times height times width. So once I measure my width, my length, and my height, then I measure, I multiply the numbers together and also multiply the units and then get my volume. Okay, so once I get my volume, then I have the volume of my rectangular block. So once I know the mass of my rectangular block, I divide my mass by volume, and that gives me the density of my rectangular block. Also, if I don't know the mathematical formula for my regular object, I can use what we call the water displacement method. So what is the water displacement method? Water displacement just means put in a certain amount of water in a graduated cylinder and then drop your object in. So once you drop your object in, the water level is going to rise to a new level. Okay, so based on that, you'll be able to calculate the amount of water displaced, and that is equal to the volume of your object. So here, this is our graduated cylinder with a certain volume of water in it. So this volume of water is enough for our object to be submerged. So we report this volume as initial volume, V1. And then we drop in our object, and the water level is going to rise because the object is going to push water out of the way. Once it's going to be submerged, it's going to push water out of the way. And this water will rise to a certain point and then stops. So we record that point at which the water stops as our final volume. So to find the amount of water displaced, we just subtract our initial volume, which is V1, minus our final volume, which is V2. So the amount of water displaced is equal to the volume of our object. So now that we have the volume of our object, we can then proceed to calculate the density by dividing mass over volume. Now, the water displacement method also can be used for an irregular object. An irregular object is an object that hasn't got well-defined size that you can measure with a ruler or a vernier caliper. Okay, so once you have an irregular object and it sinks in your water, then you can easily use the water displacement method to find the volume of the object. Okay, so to summarize, to find the density of an object, you need to know at least two things. You need to know the mass and you need the volume. You can find the volume easily if your substance is a liquid. So if your substance is a liquid, you just have to use a graduated cylinder to measure the volume of the liquid you want to use. If your substance is a solid object, then you have to determine whether it's a regular object or an irregular object. And if it's a regular object, do you know a mathematical formula that can be used to determine the volume of it? If you know a mathematical formula that can be used, then you can go ahead and apply that mathematical formula. But you have to make sure you have all the sides measured so that you'll be able to plug in the values and then use the formula to calculate the volume. If you don't know the mathematical formula used to determine the volume of that object, then you can proceed to use the water displacement method. Okay, so just make sure you get a graduated cylinder, put in a reasonable amount of water in there, and then make sure you drop your object in there. Okay, record the initial volume before you drop. Then the water level is going to rise, and based on that, you calculate the amount of water displaced, which is equal to the volume of your object. And once you have that, you then proceed to calculate your density, which is M over V.